How's that light though? Are we worried about that? I think it's. I'm glad it washes me out a little bit with that gray back.
There you go. You look good.
Yeah, for the most part, it's all about the audio anyway, so we're good.
Hey, everybody, this is Greg Zahn.
This is Anthony Telford.
You're listening to The Walk-Off with Scott Belford and Adam Mack.
All right. We've got our first guest here on the walkout. A very thankful hello to Trevor Freeman, one of the traveling Jagrs, hockey fame. You know, you may have seen him on Hockey Night in Canada. He is firmly entrenched in the Calgary baseball community and full of fun stories. Thanks so much for joining us, bud.
No problem, Scott. I think it's called The Walk-Off, though, just to point that out.
Yes, just to give ourselves a little plug here. Yes, thank you for joining us on The Walk-Off.
I keep suggesting a name change, but Scott won't listen to me, so.
No, I'm very attached to it. No. All right, buddy.
I appreciate it, Scotty.
Yeah, man. Excited to have you on the show. I mean, we're airing this on Monday, so we're not going to get too much into how you feel about how the Jays are going to do Friday or opening day or stuff like that. But I did want to pick your brain a little bit on, I mean, we both know the psychology of baseball, 162 games. It is a marathon. And this season, 60 games, buddy. How do you think that's going to affect teams?
It's going to be crazy. I mean, guys are going to be able to go harder in the initial stages too, right? Like the ease in factor of 162 games is you sort of get a chance to figure it out. But right now you're kind of thrown to the wolves. So, you know, when we were talking the other day, we were talking about, you know, predictions for stats and that sort of thing. And I think, you know, I'm going to tell you 25 bombs is a huge season, right? Like
of course.
Games, like, you know, so the expectation level of fans is going to have to be adjusted in a lot of ways, because you can't hit a slump here, you know, and hopefully it doesn't. Like I'd hate to be a guy in a contract year this year, and I mean you could hate and love it at the same time, you know.
For sure.
Hot in that time, then all of a sudden they're awesome and they sign big dollars. But you know, if you go through a little bit of a slump in this season, it's going to be exaggerated, right? So, you know, I think one of the things we talked about is the potential for a guy to hit 400, which would be an asterisk, of course, but
yeah,
you know, it's pretty cool. I called Altuve. I think he will actually do it, even with all the garbage going on with the stuff. But you know, I think that actually plays into it, like how good a hitter he really is, that everybody's, you know, there's a lot to do with the scandal. I can tell you about it as a baseball player, you still have to hit the ball.
Yeah.
Right. You know, at the end of the day, these guys aren't just fooling around. I sent you that clip the other day, and maybe we could look that one up with the, it was from the Dodgers.
Yeah.
It's escaping me right now, but
Bellinger just hammered.
He's got this wipeout slider that, you know, like, man, big league stuff is no joke. And even if you know what's coming, you still have to key in and hit it. You know, like he took Chapman yard on that slider, which sure, arguably it's easier to pitch over the 100+ mile an hour fastball, but you still have to square it up and actually hit the damn thing, right? So,
of course. The one thing with that got me, though, is that, let's face it, 90% of the time, Chapman's throwing a fastball in that scenario.
Right,
so
right. Yeah.
Who's sitting on an off-speed pitch from?
There's no doubt that there's a value benefit to actually knowing what's coming, but
of course,
the game's changed in a lot of ways there too. In that sign stealing's always been part of the game. You know, like always.
Yeah.
Like back when the game was dirty and like, you know, guys were paying for. It was like a workman's game. It was any edge you could get. Like I got taught in Little League when we used pillow bags I play third base. And so, you know, even to this day, like, in fact, we went to the old timers tournament a couple years ago and I talked to my third baseman and I said, I was injured. So like in the old timers, you can play a little bit differently, but I said, every time we come in, like when you go out to the field, you kick that third base into the field more, like cut the field down. Right.
Yeah.
And then as you're about to leave, you push the damn thing out, right? This is all part of baseball. It's always been part of baseball. So
just a game of inches. I love it.
And so the big blow up about all of that stuff anyway is people are very much ignoring that almost every team, look at the Jays themselves, had a sign stealing scandal for 2 seasons.
The men in white out in center field.
At the end of the day, I'll tell you as a ball player, there's 2 schools of thought on that. Is that I don't even want to know, because I'm already focused. And if I have to refocus on a sound or whatever else, it takes away from my vision, which is way more important than anything else, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking for arm slots, and I'm looking for, little subtle hints from the pitcher out at what they're tipping anyway. And I would rather be locked into that than to be trying to focus on a last minute banging of a
garbage can. Yes. As hilarious as that scandal is.
Well, and that's just it, right? At the end of the day, yeah, they did it. No, I'm not arguing that they did it. They're going to get plunked a ton this year because of it.
Yeah.
They got, again, when you're talking about 60 games over 162, so 60 bruises instead of 162, there's your
first. That's right.
Year, right? So
then that's interesting, because I do wonder, this whole Corona thing probably hasn't eviscerated this hatred of the Astros amongst the rest of the league, right? They're still going to get plunked, you think?
I just saw a thing yesterday that was 3 plunks today from the Royals, right? It's just, it has to be standard, and everybody's out for blood and blah, blah, blah. And, even talking about turning over the MVP and all those sort of things, oh man, whatever, You're talking about baseball. So first of all, you want to go back to the steroid scandal, right? You're telling me that the MLB is completely absolved of any knowledge of steroids to grow the game at that time, right? Everybody remembers Sosa and McGuire.
Yeah.
It was awesome. It was fucking awesome. Right?
Yeah, of course it was.
Every fan that wants to say that wasn't awesome, and every fan that wants to say that the Astros run, they weren't invested in. If you're a baseball fan, you were into the Astros that year.
Of course. Of course. Well, it's funny. Even Adam and I were talking about last episode about how Eric Gagne won the Cy Young with 85 saves in 2003, right? And obviously juice to the max, right? But 85 saves.
Crazy.
We'll never see it again.
So here's a funny side story. That's the school that my sister actually went to. So my sister played softball at his junior college.
Oh, really?
In Oklahoma. Met her husband, an Aussie guy who played there as well. So just it's funny how those little things come together,
Yeah.
Your life. And for me, I have this 6 degree of separation through hockey and baseball that are just, to me, sometimes I laugh and they're a little bit crazy, right? Just such the game itself it's so hard that it's so weird to make those associations like that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, in terms of this season, it'll be an interesting one to watch. I think it's an asterisk season right off the get-go, of course, because of the 60 games. But at the same time, maybe it teaches us something different too, right? Maybe it teaches us that a shorter schedule is something that's a little bit better for the player's health and longevity and those things, right? Which meaning you don't want to drop out a ton of games or anything like that, but if they had an extra off day, imagine what these players can accomplish, right?
That's the thing, is maybe 120, 130 game season is the way to go. Maybe you do add around a playoffs. Maybe, there is stuff you can do, I think, to improve the quality of baseball, but
well, and that's just it. At the end of the day, looking at it, this is a chance for us to reset the way that we look at how our fandom for the game is too. Obviously you're a diehard Jays fan, so you're watching all the time. Man, when Sportsnet picked up all the games, that was the greatest day of any baseball player's life because they also ended up picking up a bunch of out-of-market games and everything too, right? So it's awesome for a guy I'm a baseball fan. I'll watch any game at any time. About playoffs, every guy that I've ever played ball with, we've had groups of guys get together and watch those games. And like even now with the advent of say like a WhatsApp group or whatever, like if guys are watching at home, they're chatting the whole time and just like there's a lot of back and forth and talk about baseball, which I think is really cool, especially for a place where, you know, honestly, as a baseball player who's trying to grow the game in like Alberta, you know, we're fifth, if that, like lucky, you know, on the list of sports that kids can play. One of the most lucrative games that you could play professionally, right? So like you're talking about a Mike Trout contract, you know, in order to get there, I'm shocked that there's so little interest in like youth baseball in Canada. And being a coach of that, honestly, the parents are super interested, but they've sort of forgotten how to teach kids how to love the game the way that you love the game. Clearly, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I love the game. I love the game for the game itself. And that's what I think the 60-game season will end up doing, is it's going to teach people to, you know, to be able to watch, like really watch a game, not just you can't take a game for granted. Like every one of these games counts.
They do.
If you know the game, you can, or if you want to learn more about the game, this is a great season to be able to do it, because the way they talk about the game is going to be different and all those things.
And it does matter. Every game does matter, which is such, I mean, let's face it, last year, well, any year, at 60 games into a season, people are still saying stuff like, it's early. We'll get it together. Don't worry about it. Like,
well, so that's, to me, that's such a casual fan attitude, because I'll point out one thing. I mean, 30 games of spring training, right?
Yes.
So like these guys are playing, but in game 2, watch a third base coach wave a guy in at a play at the plate where it's going to be close and it's a play at the plate.
Yeah.
That's what, as a baseball super nerd, that's the stuff I watch, because that's how much that game actually does matter. Because when you're a half game back in September and that guy didn't score on that, you know,
play in April. Yeah.
You know, like, hey, that outfielder went to his left a little bit and had to spin to throw, but still made this professional throw. You know what I mean? Like that's, they're playing at such an elite level that the casual observer sometimes doesn't realize how hard that play actually is, and how much it was forced by the knowledge that third base coach is sending that guy to, right?
Yeah.
So like
well, I'm even guilty of that, you know, like
of course there's complacency with fandom, and I mean, don't forget, so I coach, I play, like all those things are, you know, that's what we see out of it. It's why you'll find a true baseball player won't play slow pitch, because there is sort of that little bit of disconnect between those two things, because and we want people to love the game as much as we do, but until you can appreciate what 90 sounds, looks, and feels like, right? Like, you can't really understand how awesome it is to see these guys, just to see Altuve hit that slider out of the yard in that moment. Yeah. Like, it's so hard. And that's truly what's underappreciated about baseball, you know, across the board, I would say, is just like, man, you're talking about boiling and reducing down the talent level to this fine edge where, you know, hey, if you make 12 errors next year, you might not be back, right? Like,
so then my question for you here is, how do you feel as a baseball guy, as someone who recognizes how difficult it is and how much strategy goes into it, the fact that there is now in 60 games a complete rule change with DHs across the board? And do you think that's a disadvantage to NL teams now, who don't have that big bat on the bench that maybe a lot of AL teams do?
I mean, I think it could possibly play that factor, but the reality is if you're a good NL team, let's bring up Matt Stairs, right? So Matt Stairs, the ultimate pinch hitter. I mean, you probably have that guy on your bench. Here's the flip of that is that guy might be a AAA player in the AL. Right. Still professional. Like, that's how like sandwich tight that is that like, when you think about the way that professional baseball works, most guys make the jump from AA to the big leagues, and they don't go to AAA necessarily because AAA is sort of a bit of a fallback. It's a guy who's lost, he honestly has lost, I would say, just the ability to believe in himself more than anything else, right? Like he's lost a little bit of confidence and needs to gain that back against players that are still exhibiting the same, almost the same stuff as a big league club.
It's funny you bring that up because that's one thing that sometimes I forget, and then you get a reminder of it, like just how close you are from AAA to literally being a superstar. And this is where steroids kind of like really made things weird, because I remember 2015, remember Chris Colabello comes up with the Jays, and all of a sudden just he hits and hits and hits, at 32, and you're like, where the hell did this like career AAA guy come from? And then of course you find out that he did steroids the next year, and you're like, well, shit.
But he did that because he wanted to stay, right?
Of course.
That's that thing is that like, I'm not condoning the usage. I'm just saying that like, that's how hard that it truly is that. And
how close these guys are. Competitive
advantage. Yeah. There's actually a great Netflix documentary right now called The Losers. And it's about everybody who's, they sort of just lost. And that's baseball. You know what I mean? So crazy. As a baseball player, one of the things that it took into my life was losing's okay as long as you try again, or as you know what I mean? Like, you're so, you're not even 50-50 as a hitter, right?
And if that's the truth, is that you're not even 50-50, and we're talking about the best guys, like if you're hitting 1 out of 3, you're literally top of the game. Well, so the psychology of that just always blows me away with baseball.
And it comes into play constantly. I can tell you that stepping in against anybody in that one-on-one matchup in the moment comes into play. Like you bring everything, even in men's league, play stupid men's league. But what I loved about The Last Dance is the reflection for myself of how competitive you get. And I think almost every baseball player knows that level of competition because they've dug in, looked out to the mound and been like, fuck you, I'm going to beat you today, right here, right now. Right. Yeah. Player, in my opinion, right? Like, that should be, that's that Michael Jordan mentality of like, if you don't bring that to every single at bat, then you don't deserve to be here. I laugh because I was talking to some guys about my men's league year last year, and like, this is just the idea of a guy who's still just playing men's league because he loves the game and that, but I dove for a ball in every single game last year. Like I hurt my arm in the first game diving backwards, like in a crazy dive, and was injured for the entire season, but played the entire season, right? Because we were hosting the Nationals. So I was like, well, like I can't slip. Like this is basically training for the old timers thing for me. And I just never questioned it, right? Like,
you just don't lose that competitiveness is what that shows, right? Like if you're in it, you're in it. It doesn't matter if you're playing, men's league softball or you're playing professional. If you're competitive, you're competitive. Like,
and it's such a cool thing. That's baseball always tests you because every at bat will test you with that. Every defensive alignment will, and you'll see guys who are just out there just for the fun of it, and they don't have that edge anymore. And that's the difference is at men's league, you have to be like, yeah, sure, man, I get it. It's like when you play men's league hockey and you don't fight a guy that you'd normally fight,
right?
Or like, all right, man, we got to go to work tomorrow. But, sometimes you can't get rid of that and shake that instinct. So it's a game that stays with you in that way, which is cool. And that, like, again, under the sort of the idea of that 60 game season, you're going to see guys just go hard, right? Like they all know the score, that's the only guy that might not, but still does, Justin Smoke. I See, like in my baseball circles, we sort of talk shit about Justin Smoke because he's awesome, right?
Yeah.
Like I'll never the guy's talent. Nobody can forget that they brought him in to replace Teixeira, right?
Yeah.
The reason Teixeira was ever a Yankee was because they were like, we got Justin Smoke, man.
Yeah.
So when he came alive with the Jays, I was just like, yes, man, that's awesome. And then I'd watch some interviews with Smokey and I'd be like, oh, I kind of know where this is at. Like, you might be the slowest guy mentally in here, but he still does get it, right? Like he puts in that hard work. He does what he needs to do. That was why, like, he became one of my favorite players to watch because he just decided to be, I'm going to try and be awesome every day. Right. So like
that swing, God, he had a pretty swing. Still does, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. From both sides. Right.
From both sides. Yeah.
Like you're talking about a guy that like that level of talent to be a switch hitter in the big leagues at all is not so. You know,
and he was never a guy who got the credit defensively. I thought he should.
No. But that was what got him there in the first place. I think. Like, you know, I mean, it's funny because there's some stories out of Seattle with Smoke that he was just like, you know, just proximity, and that Calgary was the place where the Mariners had their farm system for years. I've always watched the Mariners too because we get some Mariners games on TV and those kind of things, and just like that's the closest MLB city to here, really. So, you know, hearing a few of the stories out of Seattle, you got a pretty rough ride there because they paid him a fair amount of money, and you know, he didn't really produce.
He didn't find it there. No.
Sort of his last bet. And man, I'm surprised more free agents don't come to Toronto just to play in the Rogers Center, right?
Yeah.
I'll always call the Sky Dome because it's the Sky Dome.
Yeah.
But one of the easiest places in the league to hit.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like, you want to go, you can go gap to gap there, no problem. It's standard everywhere. You've got some of the cool elements that you have in different stadiums and stuff, but you got that indoor air, right? Like
a very controlled environment. Absolutely. In fact, I remember being in Toronto, watching R.A. Dickey pitch in August and the dome being closed on a sunny day because they're like, well, RA needs,
you know, which is, I mean, but that's again, when you're talking about cheating with the Astros and all those, these are just competitive advantages that you look for in baseball, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's sort of a fun, little, you know, Jason Bay as a Canadian guy, my sister, so I coached softball growing up as well after I turfed my scholarship. That's a story for another podcast about turning scholarship for a girl. But I then made it a mission to coach. So I coached a couple Olympians who played with Lauren Bay, who's Jason Bay's, you know, sister and stuff.
Yeah, amazing. You
know, when he went to Seattle there, he went to the Mets first, remember?
Yeah.
And signed for big money.
Huge money.
In a ballpark that was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Then he went to Seattle and did the same thing. Like that, man, do you remember they brought the fences in at the new stadium in Seattle because it just wasn't hitter friendly at all in that sort of heavy air, right? Like chilly, heavy air. And all the while, if Jason Bay just signs in Toronto, he probably has he's in his prime. He
has 30 home run season after 30 home run season for sure.
And he might even still be a guy that you talk about with a lot of relevance, right? Like as comparative to a Morneau almost even, right? Like it's so hard for Canadian ball players to gain that air of like Walker and Morneau and, you know, like those kind of guys that you have to actually think situationally. And that's the cool thing about this year. Like I'm hoping a Canadian guy steps up and stands out in 60 games and then all of a sudden actually gets a chance to go. Right.
Yeah.
So it
could happen. I like,
it really could, you know, like, I mean, you look at Soroka as the opening day starter, right?
Yeah. Love it. And out of Okotoks, like beautiful. Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the it's just getting the opportunity because you know a Canadian kid will compete, right?
Yeah.
Look at Rob Ducey. You know what I mean? Like, man, that guy, whenever he got a chance to play, I'd love to watch him play because he was a Canadian kid playing for the Jays, right? But he had no quit. He wasn't the most talented player on the field pretty much ever. But I can tell you right now from experience, you throw that guy on a men's league team and you see the difference between a professional and an amateur, right? Yeah. So, like, you really get to appreciate that level that it takes to actually compete at the big league level. And, you know, like that's sort of a cool thing. Like when I coach, that's one of the things I see in transition is that a lot of Canadian kids are getting a chance now because they got multi-sports. So they're very athletic, right? But I took a team of 10-year-olds, like 10 to 12-year-olds down to Arizona about 3 years ago. We're playing in a preseason tournament, and I was just like, oh, man. So I'm watching my guys warm up on one side, and it's just like ball pass, clang against the, like against the fence. We're throwing from like 40, 50 feet out. Like they're barely hitting each other in the chest. And I look across the diamond, and these kids are going 290 pole to pole.
Yeah.
Baseball my whole life, Scott. Like I throw pretty hard even to this day. I could not 100% could not have the accuracy or the like arm strength that these 10-year-olds had, right? And I was just, so I called my guys in and I was like, we're about to take a beating. Like, and I mean a beating.
Yeah.
If you compete, you have the skill to compete. You have to believe in that. But these guys are just going to be better. They've had more practice. They've had more time outside. They've got better coaching, because that's the problem. Like I know that this stuff, but you're 10 years old and we can't give you a pro level because you're 10 years old and you only understand at a 10-year-old level, right? If you haven't been around it the way that these kids have. But I find that, that 10-year-old American kid that has that skill, well, eventually a Canadian kid will catch up. And because they've played other sports and they have this competitive edge, they end up excelling. And so you see a guy like Soroka come out who's just got this great work ethic and he's got the stuff that like physically he can develop into something, right? Like I played against Rietsma and I know how good Rietsma was when we were kids and that sort of thing. So when he starts working with Soroka, and then Jim Lawson is the guy that really, the Redbirds are really the program that brought him up. Like Jim Lawson was an early pioneer in Calgary. He made sure that kids knew what it was like to play at a major league level and could think at the major league level. Right? Jimmy played, I think he played double A is where again, the competition you watch that double A level. Oh, lost you.
Oh, there we go.
If you watch that double A level, then what you'll find out of that are guys who have the stuff. And now to get to the next spot, they need to be able to think it out. Right? So, that was the benefit for Soroka is that he was a kid who had the tenacity of a Canadian kid, and then he had somebody who could kind of show him the ropes and guide him to that place. Right. And then somebody like Rietsma who could help him refine a pitch or, like those sort of things. And now he's killing, man. It's awesome.
Oh, it's so great to watch.
I know that coached him and watch him play. Like everybody watches every start and they're just fully invested in that because, again, in a 60-game season, if Mikey wins 8 this year, that's 20. You know what I mean? In fact, I would say 7-0 is Cy Young worthy this year, right?
So that's really interesting because now I do have some questions for you about what do you think the ERA is going to be the lowest ERA this season? How many home runs do you think a guy's going to need to hit to win the home run title?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, I think 25 was probably a huge mark. It's huge. Consider what was it, 14 in June that 14 in a month is I think is the all-time home run or something like that. Right. So, when you extrapolate that, double that and say 28, that is off your ass.
Yeah.
I honestly, 20 to 25 homers is a very productive season.
Yeah.
I'm going to say a guy in the AL that has the chance to hit, depending if Trout plays for sure or not, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still sort of, it looks like he's going to, but
Yeah.
you know, who knows at the same time. How do you not like him for, I think he had a bit of a slow start last year, but like he ended up coming bombing back, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, realistically, 20 to 25 homers, I'm going to say you do have that chance that somebody hits 400, though. You just do.
You do.
And the reason I pick Altuve for that is because with guys gunning for him and only worried about that, they won't always worry about the great hitter that he is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, so if you're going to plunk Altuve because you got something out against the Astros, well, one thing that everybody's forgetting out of that is, man, when you intentionally hit somebody, situationally, it's in the first inning, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a wash. So if you've still got a guy who wants to get his pound of flesh out of Altuve and he's stupid enough to do it in later innings, the Astros are going to win some games because
for sure.
For one. So, and you know they have the talent. Yeah, maybe they cheated, but they still got it done. So how do you absolutely everybody in the league, how do they be like, no, we're going to hit them. We're going to hit them. You've just added base runners.
Yeah.
That next guy might just go yard on you. And now you're down 2 rip. Right. And in a season like this, like, you know, I don't know I don't know who wins, right? You've got more rested pitchers. So really, you and I talked, you could see that sub-1 ERA because these guys just haven't had the same workload, right? Like there's no telling what that is. Now,
and it's only 10 starts. Like last year, the most starts was 34. There was about 5 guys who had 34 starts.
Yeah.
And that's every 5 days you're starting. So like 10 to 12 max.
12 max, yeah.
So,
well, imagine facing a guy like Scherzer, who's always rested.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? And the other side of that, too, though, is that if a guy gets hurt, he's fucked. Very early. Like,
big time. Also, let's face it, you blow up once, you're done. Right? Like, you give up 7 runs in 2 innings once.
Here's the relevance of the Astros scandal in terms of what this looks like. Remember the Jays guy they were talking about? Like, everybody was mad because, the Jays guy got lit up. I forget what his name is. He's
starts with an F. I know. He's not in the majors anymore.
Exactly. But here's the thing. He probably wouldn't be anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, like I said, there's so many factors involved that's what I'm worried about for guys who are on the bubble this year. Right. And with no minor league system, you and I've talked about that. Like all of a sudden you've got this expanded roster, but you've got to find spots for all these guys.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot more 5-inning starts or 6-inning starts. And then using that bullpen to keep that bullpen relevant and fresh, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a high level of competition to win the playoffs this year, right? So,
of course,
as a manager, you have to get guys into that pressure cooker situation a lot more. Yeah. Just be ready for the playoff atmosphere, right? So, I'm interested to see how managers use their staffs, because you can't have a guy who hasn't pitched in 3 weeks come in and expect him to be good against big league hitters, because big league hitters, that's the benefit of, you know, you're starting 9. I would say bench guys get in less over the course of 60 games just because, you know, the sheer virtue of they're not getting hurt as often. Right. Yeah. There's less strains and those kind of things. And like injuries become a major factor. I mean, we all know that gamblers care most about those little injuries. You know, it's funny. I've got I split my fingernail and never had an appreciation for a pitcher with a blister more than damn fingernail. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's just such a silly little thing that catches on everything and never heals. It takes for and
it affects you, of course.
And that's just it. When you're talking about, you know, everybody always got on Sanchez about his blisters. Yeah. Man, that's a real thing.
That's a real thing.
I mean, he should have pissed on his hands like Moise Alou, like really, but he didn't, and that's his fault. But look at how good that guy was. Imagine Sanchez without blisters. Right?
Yeah.
He's a guy that he had that stuff that, and he still does. He still does, but he it's always going to be a problem. So don't ever join that upper echelon because he's late in his career, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually curious about the Stroman storyline this year too.
Me too.
You know what I mean? Like new team, complete 60 game season, right? Like, let's see if he got the stuff. He was always sort of, he had that little man thing, right? Which, man, I get, like, super hard for you to compete against Judge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and not just Judge directly, but pitchers that are like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, a guy who's 6'10", who's coming down at you, I can tell you right now, I'd rather face a little guy who has to beat me than to face that guy that, like, he's the ball's right in front of your face before it explodes out, right? Like,
and Stroman has always been a guy that's kind of like, when you're talking about like mental fortitude, you know, like when you're just talking about just the strength of being able to believe in yourself and move yourself forward. I mean, 2015, when he came back from that torn ACL in half a season, and then was the friggin' reason they went to the ALCS pretty much, like, incredible, right? Like,
you know what the shitty part is that, like, I feel that's what Goudreau's like for the Flames here. You know what I mean? Like, here's a guy with immense talent, but he knows it. And instead of just being awesome every time he wants to talk about that, well, guess what? You can let us talk about it because we will. Like, people recognize it, will talk about it. You just have to take the attitude that you have out on the field and leave the Twitter alone, because at the end of the day, that is a distraction that a manager can't even, like, managers right now can't even fathom that. It's funny because I follow Bauer on Instagram, and he's got that. I
love Bauer on Instagram.
And for a pitcher, I think it is actually a medium that you could use, and because you've got so much downtime, right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, even with that, the funny thing that they're forgetting, and it is sort of a pitcher thing, is if you're adding fuel to a hitter's fire, you know, there's always a cycle with hitting and pitching, right? Good pitching beats good hitting, and then all of a sudden hitting skews, and then the pitchers have to change, and then, you know, it's this back and forth seesaw that they're forgetting about. And the last thing you want to do, again, to reference Jordan, is light the fire under somebody's ass to beat you. Because
let sleeping dogs lie.
always in baseball. Man, I coach my kids that, right? Like, I had this 10-year-old kid, and here's Marcus Stroman to a T. Little kid, throwing okay. He's just throwing strikes. Man, you're not doing anything special. So he's up on the mound because he's watched highlights of Stroman, like, you know, he's fist pumping and carrying on and stuff. And so this kid throws a strike, and he's fist pumping the strike. And I go, whoa, what's that? And he's like, threw a strike. I was like, awesome. Guess what? That guy still has 2 chances. So he throws strike 2. And it's a bigger celebration. So I stop and I go, well, what are you going to do for the strikeout? Like, you've already blown your wad here, and you've got nothing left for the actual celebration that could come. And there is a release that comes from punching out a batter, but that's only 1 of 3. It's only 1 of 3. Yeah. So I'll tell you what, if I'm the guy on the on-deck circle, I'm looking for you to throw me that first pitch fastball that you think is so great, and I'm going to turn your neck, right? But in addition, you're still facing the first hitter, and you've still got to throw him. Yeah. You've got to throw him multiple pitches. Like, you want to try and throw that one, but now you can't. Like, you're going to get overconfident on this side of it too, and then you are going to make a minuscule mistake that causes a problem, and then
gets rubbed in your face.
And you get rocked. You have way more to lose, and the potential of not getting that same level of confidence back for yourself, right? So, like, the reality of that is that I think that as an outside distraction for a pitcher, like Bauer's just what I love about it is that he's sort of irreverent, and he's just like, I'm going to see you. I'm going to punch your ticket. He always, he's telling everybody he's going to, but it is that competitive attitude and stuff. But the minute he has that drone mistake, man, I am going to sit in the on deck circle all day and say, oh, and whatever you want.
Oh, of course.
What are you doing, man? If you want to be that guy, you can't leave yourself. You're leaving yourself no outs and no excuses anymore, right?
Yeah.
So, and with that, like baseball, I would argue it's a game of not excuses per se, but you have to have such a short memory especially as a hitter. Whereas the other side of that skews is that because pitchers do have a little bit of an advantage, they don't always have that same short memory that a hitter does have. Yeah, you may have gotten me, but I'm going to not forget that, and I'm going to institute it in my next at bat, and I'm going to get you 3 or 4 times in a game, and you're a puzzle that I'm trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
So realistically, having something outside the diamond that leaves you open to get hurt on the diamond, as a manager, I'd be like, fuck you, get off that goddamn thing,
Right? Yeah.
Like, worry about what's happening here, because I know that eventually you're gonna get hurt by what you're doing, because it comes to a point where guys are giving too much information online or any of those sort of things too, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting juggling game they're playing, right? Where like you can tell that Bauer rubs some guys the wrong way, and that psychologically is great too, where if they're going into the batter's box mad, hilarious. Like that's all advantage Bauer, right? But at the same time, if you're like giving them too much fuel, right? Like it's
but I'm gonna tell you who he's getting. He's getting 7, he's getting 8, and he's getting 9.
Yeah.
But so let's say the Angels. You got Trout and Pujols there. 2 guys that are like, I don't care what you're talking about there. You got to beat me with your stuff, and I'm the best at figuring out stuff.
Yeah, and Ohtani's still learning English, so,
So he doesn't, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
That's a good point, right? Like, the guy doesn't understand your shit talk, and he's only looking at what's happening in front of him.
Yeah.
Own your ass, and the only person that gets hurt is you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the craziest part about the game, and at that level too, and look at a guy like Ohtani. Like, imagine that. He has the discipline of Japanese heritage is what I would also say. The discipline of being a great pitcher and the discipline of being a great hitter. And then you take out the X factor that is shit talk. Because I can tell you, it happens a ton, man. Like, if you came and watch a men's league game, you're going to hear me tease the shit out of everybody on my bench first.
Yeah.
Right? That's the difference. And then guys that I know on the field, forget about it. Every time I get near them, I'm going to talk shit to them a little bit. Right? And so, when you take that factor out where you can, remember, what is it, Major League? Hey, you got Mr. Baseball. You got any naked pictures of your wife? You want some, right? Like little nuances that happen when you're in these interactions on the field that aren't captured by even a TV camera or whatever.
Even in Major League, when he comes to the plate and he's like, "Hey, how's your wife and my kids?"
Yeah, exactly. These are those little things that are. It is that's what the expansion of it is what these pitchers are doing online, but at the same time, like, you have to tread very carefully with that. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, because if you give a guy fuel to beat you, then as a manager, I'd rather you just focus on beating that person instead of, really rubbing it in or whatever. Like, I was just watching the Immaculate Inning again, right, the other day. And I mean, the miscommunication after Jose hits that bomb when Edwin's trying to tell the crowd to settle down and stuff, and just play, is so crazy, and truly, to me, only based on the social media culture of like, you better than you did me, right? Like, and that's the bat flip, man.
God, what a crazy inning.
It was. And really, I wouldn't say it invented bat flip culture. It just brought it more to the attention of the youth. And so they're bat flipping the first inning home run they hit off a guy. And it's like, dude, you've got to still face this guy for a whole game. So if we're only worried about being able to flip a bat on him and make the big show of it and stuff, in the biggest moments, man, I flipped my bat the way Batista did because I knew it and because it was something I did. It was nothing against the pitcher, but it could always be misconstrued that way.
Yeah.
In that moment of that tension release, you're a comedian. You know what it's like. You build that tension, you release that. It's the laugh. That's just the laugh, right? Like that.
Oh. We lose him, Scott?
Yeah, just for a sec here.
Oh, sounds like he's coming back. It's that lead-lined basement that he's sitting in.
But
hey, Scott, we're at the 45-minute mark. Do you want to call that first half?
Around
we'll split it into... We can keep going, but we'll call that part one, and then.
I think we've lost you here, Trev. If you can hear us.
So we'll just keep things going. But once we get them back, just say a welcome back, and then we'll.
Oh shoot! Did we lose them all together here?
Might have. But yeah, that was right at 45 minutes, perfect. So. If you want to go for another 45 with them or something, and that can be for the following week or for down the road.
Just get
you guys me on audio?
Oh, there we go. I think we got him.
I don't have video on him, but you can kind of hear him.
I got audio again.
Okay. We have your audio's kind of in and out is all. Damn it. We were into it.
So good. Do you want to end it there, or should I just take this out?
No, let's see if we can get it back on.
I just mean for a part 1, part 2 thing.
Yeah, for part 1, that's probably great there.
We'll just make an announcement then at the end of that it did cut out and we lost them and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But yeah, of course, we'll keep going as long as we can get them back.
I've got a rant.
I didn't catch any of that.
Okay.
Oh, video's back.
Is it? Nice. I can't hear him.
It's choppy. I can't hear him either.
I've got Trevor's network bandwidth is low.
Gotcha. Tell the kids to get off Netflix. It's all good.
He's
here we go. Nice.
He's only old enough to not even understand any of that. 12 days old, so I don't have to yell at him just yet.
He's still a potato, yeah. All right. Well, we got you back here.
I do have to run though, guys.
Okay.
But do we want to do a closeout? And then I'll make time. I'll make time again. Don't worry about it.
That would be amazing, man. Honestly, thank you so much for taking the time. This was fucking so fun, dude, to just chat baseball with you. This was great.
Yeah, we didn't even get into any other stuff.
I know. You know what? Do you have time to tell us the story? I want to hear about in 2011 the Brewers scout trying to convince you to come down.
Yeah. Well, so we used to practice down at the Dogs facility. I mean, the Dogs facility is world class, and that's sort of what would institute that. Being around the game for all the years I have, I coached the guy who runs all their marketing and basically does the in-game communications and stuff. So I used to coach his kids, and then his kids played men's league baseball with me as well. So I'd bring a case of beer down. They let me use the $6 million field house, right? So There was plenty of beer that they got out of it. Like, it was a good relationship.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, we're down there, and one of the things that even when I was scouted early was fundamentals. Like, I had a lot of fundamental knowledge drilled into me at a very early age, and I built the baseball IQ over the course of my many years, let's say. So we would just go down, and there's a handful of us that made the drive down to Okotoks that day. It was kind of a snowy, shitty day, and it was late. And so they do private lessons on the other side of the facility. And I'm just taking ground balls, and they just brought in these 2 new coaches that were scouts with the Brewers. So we were just practicing, kind of getting ready for the season, whatever. And I can kind of hear something. I'm just taking ground balls, normal, I'm just trying to be good for the season kind of thing. And I can hear the guy saying something, but like, I don't know that it's directed at me necessarily, but you know what I mean? Like, they're saying something sort of around the same timing and whatever. And I've been a hitter my whole career. Like, to this day, in our FNBA, I probably lead in most offensive categories. Just, yeah. I've been a pure hitter, right? So he's impressed by my fielding just because it's good fundamentally, and I've got a decent arm and whatever. So I don't really think anything of it. And then we jump into the cage. And what was funny about that is that we had this new guy out, and I'm talking brand new. Now, the guy I want to get for you guys to talk to, do you remember the Canadian Baseball League?
Yeah.
So my good friend Tristan, who I played with, he played for the Calgary Outlaws, and then he came to play for my men's league team after that because they folded the league, right?
Right.
So I think he hit a walk-off homer in the last game of that year to wrap the league at half a season, like the first half of the season, right? So he's there, and Tristan's an engineer. And I don't know if you've hung out with engineers for any length of time, but they can be personably difficult. So I take a round in the cage, and this guy comes over, and like, man, in my prime, when I was hitting, you could hear the difference, like, especially when you're using wood bats and stuff, you can hear the difference between contact and that kind of thing. So I start hitting, and this guy comes over, and he's like, hey man, hey, where'd you play? And I was like, and I alluded to the story earlier. I turned down a scholarship for a girl, so I don't really like to talk about it in particular.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, you don't want to hear this. And I just go about my round and whatever. And after the round, he pulls me over, and he's like, hey, like, you can play, like, you got a great swing. I watched you in the field and stuff, like, and he's asking me how old I am. And at the time, I'm like 34, I'm out of shape. We're talking about, I was already making good money at a downtown job and that sort of thing. So he's offering me, he's like, I can send you to the Brewers. Like, I'll send you a low A or whatever. So what am I going to make, 15 grand and ride the bus all summer? It's flattering to
be the oldest guy there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wish I could say that's the only time it ever happened. And for me, it's actually it's a bittersweet story every time, because it makes me know how poor my choice of following that girl who I haven't been with for 20 years at this point too, right? So the best part about the way that story ends, though, is that I'm talking to this guy, and I'm just like, you know what, man, I love the game, and like, I'd love to be around the dogs and whatever else it is. So, making those real connections and stuff with baseball people has always been a good thing to me. So, I took that away from it. But as I'm doing that, I'm watching this brand new kid throw to a guy in the cage. And me and this guy are just kind of talking and watching a little bit, right? So he's throwing, and it's pathetic BP. And honestly, when you get to men's league, if you can't throw good BP, you are in the shit house. Every guy, it's sort of the simplest thing to do, and it's something that tells everybody else that you sort of have an idea of the game, I guess. And this guy was just nervous. It was his very first time out. He's watching. I've had more than one player come up to me after their first practice and just be like, what the fuck, man? Like, why didn't you play anywhere or whatever? And so he's just watched me take a round, and then this other like former pro steps in against him, and he's just trying to throw muffins in there. And with BP, you have to put a little zip on it. Well, this guy's lobbing them in. And so I'm talking to this Brewer scout, and I just look, and all of a sudden this ball comes in and hits him right in the forehead. Like he doesn't even move. The hitter doesn't even move. And then he loses it on this guy. And again, I lean back to the engineer attitude is that like he was trying to impress the scout too. You know what I mean? He's like, anything he can do, I can do better kind of thing. And then this guy plunks him in the head. But what the scout and I both look at, we just look at each other and he goes, did he even move? And I was like, no, he just looked at him right in the forehead. It was like 30 miles an hour and just didn't move. Like, I don't know what the hell he was doing. He was so rattled. He wasn't getting good BP and couldn't show off for the scout. I hit him right in the head, right? So we had a pretty good laugh about it. But, you know, I mean, it's one of those things that if you stay around the game long enough, like, it affirmed to me that I was a decent baseball player at least, and that being around and coaching and helping kids develop themselves now was, I'm just old enough to have missed the internet when I was playing, right? So like the internet was just around, but to scout for colleges, to go to a decent college in the downtown library, you'd have to go to there was a book that was about that thick, and it just had athletic directors' names and the school. And
right.
You would send VHS tapes of yourself to all these schools, and like at a postage fee of insurmountable calculation, right? It would have been ridiculous. And you know, I did have some opportunities. There happened to be a few scouts around, and I played in the right places and stuff. But you know, of course, at the time, like, we only ever got to see a little bit of college baseball. So I wanted to go to Miami. I wanted to go to like all these unrealistic places. But the reality is that I played against players who played at those places, but I was from Canada and didn't know I was from Canada. Right. So, you know, when the impetus is on hockey and all those sort of things, you need guys who have either been there or wanted to be there or wanted to understand that system to help kids get to the places where they want to go, and also help them understand that if you go to a D2 school or any of these things, man, just work, right? Go there, learn what you can learn, work, you can transfer, you can still get drafted, you can do all these things. You can still be a baseball player and be from Canada.
Yeah. Well, shit, it's very cool. And like at 34, they're like, you could still play professional baseball. That's very cool.
It's such a weird thing. I just laughed because I looked down. I was like, I don't know, man. You know, I don't want to do that much running. You know, it's been great. But again, like I said, like, you know, when guys see that, then you get the opportunity then to make that connection. And then a kid who could go, I mean, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, man, I got somebody you might want to look at, right? So, like, people sort of trust your opinion and value your opinion more on those sort of things. And, you know, that's been a really cool element for me. And then, you know, I mean, years later, all of a sudden I'm coaching for World Baseball Softball and like things like that, right? Yeah. So, you know, that's definitely a story for another podcast where I met the guy Machado replaced in the Orioles system, and he couldn't coach a kid to take a swing to save his life, right? Yeah. Like, it's a funny, different environment that is, you know, when you talk about Canada versus Latin America, really, right? Like, you know, it's the complete polar opposite in terms of weather and all those sort of things. Like, but yeah, I mean, I love being a baseball guy in Canada, right? Like not just a fan of the game, but a guy who's still at 43 playing and, you know, actively competing and those sort of things too. It gets in your blood in a way that whether I like it because it's harder or, you know, like I played hockey at a high level too, but I loved baseball. I still love baseball in a way that I can barely put to words to this.
No, I can tell, man. I have really enjoyed talking baseball with you and just the passion for the game you have. And honestly, thank you so much, brother, for taking the time to chat with us here on the Walk-Off. We'll definitely have you back.
My boy Duncan at Oh My. He's another baseball guy that I'm bringing for you guys.
Awesome.
Same thing. Like, you know, that's the coolest part about the baseball community as you grow into it here is that you meet guys that are as passionate and, you know, they've got these great stories. I told you, like my buddy Brent, who played with Angel Pagan, and he was a guy who coached Soroka and stuff. And, you know, like, I mean, the funny thing about men's league is that it's men's league and it's, you know, it's a little bit of washout stuff, but these guys all have these great stories of playing and being passionate about the game. And that's, you know, what that culminates in is we bring the national tournament to town, or we travel like every summer, August long weekend, we go to a national tournament that's been running 30 years because guys who loved the game and they still love the game. They still love to play and compete and do those things. Right. So,
well, it's even great to see
baseball stories in Canada.
Well, it's great to see even Baseball Alberta, how much it is growing and how much the program is just like, you're seeing people come out of it now, you know, like I remember growing up, just if it wasn't Southern BC or Southern Ontario, you just weren't playing baseball. Like,
and you know, honestly, it's still sort of that way. I mean, that's part of the reason why we travel and go to these things, because that's what ends up, like when we go to the old timers things, that's what you see. Like guys are like, oh, we didn't know that there was this good of baseball in Alberta. Alberta? You know? No, man. So we used to play in all the summer tournaments, and Irricana, just up the road from Calgary, 100 years of baseball in Irricana.
Wow.
So that, you know, they do little things like, man, some of my best friends in baseball came from all the small towns in Southern Alberta and stuff, because we'd go to the shitty tournament and drink beer all weekend, right? Like, you know, it'd be a men's league tournament where you got guys competing, and honestly, the greatest hecklers you'll ever find are in the beer gardens about 3 in. And you know, when there isn't a professional comedian coming back at them, it's pretty good time. It's just a lot of I'd call it pile on comedy from the beer gardens, right? But anyway, we'll wrap it up for now. And
all right, brother,
I'd love to sit and talk to you guys again. It was a lot of fun for me as well. So
awesome.
We'll get into those traveling Jagrs tales and all those sort of things on another
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks again, Trevor. Appreciate it, man.